Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the second webinar of the CTE Counselor Academy. The webinar today is Understanding Your Role in the Comprehensive Local Needs Assessment. We are excited today to have Tasha Allen from the Illinois Community College Board with us. She is the Director for Career and Technical Education. Whitney McAfee, I always pronounce that wrong, I apologize, from Illinois State Board of Education. Marcy Rocky from the Office of Community College Research and Leadership, and my name is Amy Julian, and I'm the Director for the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support. Just a little housekeeping items before we get started. All of the attendees are currently in listen-only mode. We will be pausing for questions, and you will also have an opportunity, if you have audio capabilities, you can raise your hand and we can unmute you during the question period, or you are very welcome to post those questions in that question box there, and then when we pause, we'll be able to read those off and address any questions you have. We're very excited to have everyone today, and thank you all for attending. This webinar is being recorded, as was the first webinar, so if you did not see the first one, I will be sending that out to all the registrants today, and you'll have that opportunity to view and have these as resources. So with that, I'd like to hand the floor over to Whitney to start us off.
Thank you, Amy. Just wanted to say thank you to everyone for taking a moment out of your day. We know you are all very busy individuals, and your role as either secondary or post-secondary career and academic counselors. We know that every day you're being pulled in multiple directions, and for you to take a moment to learn with us today and maybe review a little bit, we really appreciate that. We wanted to start out by saying that the Comprehensive Local Needs Assessment is a very important foundational element of the new Perkins 5 Act that was reauthorized in 2018. And it really is that key to seeing that all students are targeted and are given access to quality opportunities in CTE, and that those opportunities are available to launch them to whatever next step that they have in their either career or college pathway. And I think it's really exciting, the work that has taken place between Illinois State Board of Education, who I am representing, the Illinois Community College Board, the Office of Community College Research and Leadership, as well as our Workforce Innovation Board that have partnered in this process to really think this through and how we can all work together to have the best outcome for students. And we just want to continue to say equity will be seen all throughout this process, both at the secondary and post-secondary level and at all those interaction and intersection points. So just really key to make those points, that we're ensuring that all students have those equal opportunities, that those are quality opportunities, and that we make sure that they're successful in their future endeavors. Amy, do I transition the slide? Sorry. Thank you. Just wanted to take a moment to share a little bit of our Illinois State Board of Education and our Superintendent, Dr. Carmen Ayala's focus as we move forward. Dr. Ayala and our board began in spring of this past year with the agency, and it was wonderful timing because the principles that they have set out to guide our work align so perfectly with the Comprehensive Local Needs Assessment. Again, you can see the top principle, equity, and we've talked about that, quality, and we've talked about the linkage with quality CTE programs. You're going to see throughout this process all of the opportunities for several partners to collaborate to bring the best outcome for students. And we cannot do this alone. This is a community endeavor. And so it's really exciting to see the alignment between, I'm going to say CLNA from here on out instead of Comprehensive Local Needs Assessment, to see that alignment between the CLNA and our principals. And I know the Community College Board also has that same focus as we've walked through this process together. So it's just exciting to see all those intersections. Just a couple quick slides. I'm not going to read all of this, but is the new mission and our equity statement. You will see that focus again, each and every child. You will see that we are trying to provide quality opportunities for education so that they can do so in a safe and healthy environment. You'll see that data-driven approach, and all of those things really align so perfectly with the CLNA. Again, at the bottom of our mission, that partnership approach with educators, families, and stakeholders. So just an amazing alignment between the mission and the CLNA. With our equity statement, this really has helped us as an agency think through all the amazing backgrounds that our students, our staff and administration in our schools, all of the diverse backgrounds that come into this and the life experiences that are brought to the table, and how we really can leverage those as strengths instead of seeing them as barriers. And I think that's really exciting in light of Perkins, in light of the CLNA process, and in light of where we're envisioning CTE to go from here moving forward. I would be remiss if I didn't send greetings from my leadership in CTE at the State Board of Education. Dr. Jason Helfer has been with our agency for many years, and he is our Deputy Superintendent of Instructional Education. Dr. Jennifer Kermis is new to our staff, and she really has brought a wonderful perspective as our Executive Director of Teaching and Learning, with a vast amount of experience and kind of a fresh perspective on the CTE planning process. And then finally, Marcy Johnson, our Director of CTE and Innovation. She is my supervisor as well as the rest of our staff supervisor. And I don't want to skip over this part. You'll have this as a resource, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but some highlights about our staff. One, if you want to reach all of us with questions about the CLNA process, the systems that we are using to collect that data, you can reach all of our staff at cteatisby.net. You also see our phone number at the top of the slide. And I wanted to also just give greetings from Heather Strom, who's our school counseling principal consultant. Unfortunately, she was unable to be here today, so I'm trying to step in and fill her shoes, but those are big shoes to fill. So she really, if you are a school counselor or in a career and academic counseling role or guidance role in your school, Heather is your main contact at the State Board of Education and brings a wealth of experience coming from the local secondary level. So just wanted to make sure everyone knows she really is your main contact. So Tasha, if you don't mind, I'm going to hand it over for a moment to you, and you can talk about the collaboration opportunities between the secondary and post-secondary, and then I'll dive a little deeper after that into the scaffolded approach at the secondary level for the CLNA process.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Whitney. And I also want to echo Whitney's previous sentiments. Thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time out of your extremely busy schedules. We know, especially this time of the year, is very busy for everyone. So we just want to thank you for your participation in this. So as we're thinking about the Comprehensive Local Needs Assessment, or the CLNA, and the collaborative efforts and the partnerships that are going to be formed throughout this process, we really think it's a very exciting opportunity. A lot of times we see that disconnect between secondary and post-secondary, and with the collaboration and the intrinsic nature of partnerships being that foundational part of the CLNA, I think we're going to see a lot of those gaps being closed. So as Whitney said, the processes are a little bit different for the secondary partners and the post-secondary partners. For post-secondary, what we're really wanting you to do at your local level is engaging all of your internal partners first, because they really are the frontline staff. You guys are all the ones who, you know your students, you know what your students need, you know their wants and their hopes. So we're wanting all of you to collaborate before you really get that external collaboration. You need to have a good foothold and understand your local institutional needs, where those equity gaps are, where those barriers are, before you can really effectively collaborate with your secondary partners. And then also your workforce board representatives, your business and industry partners, other community-based organizations, and other required stakeholders.
And then at the secondary level, really the same thought process goes into what we are wanting to see throughout this process, that you have the opportunity to reflect on this at your school level as well as a district level, and then up to our regional consortiums, our education for employment systems, and that you've had a chance to think through this process to really bring the right partners to the table within your schools or area career centers or EFEs, and then really intersecting with your post-secondary partners, your workforce partners, your community partners, as Tasha said, as well as those that are representing our special populations. So to do that, our administration felt that there needed to be a scaffolded approach where at the school or career center or EFE region center level, that you had a chance to look at your programs of study, and you had a chance to reflect on the different components of those programs of study to see maybe where our gaps might lie. And then that data would roll up to the district level, also area career centers, because they do serve students from multiple districts, as well as EFE region centers. And that is where you have a chance to take those data points and start having those conversations around those and pull in other performance data and enrollment data to really see where, again, your needs lie at that level. And then that, in essence, rolls up to the regional EFE level, where our grants come into play in our, as we move forward, that 4-year local application. And you're going to see throughout this process a very strong intersection between all of these applications. They were put together essentially to allow for those conversations, to allow for that collaboration with post-secondary partners to identify equity gaps, and to help you build your 4-year local application, which are your CTE state and federal grants. So you'll notice a lot of the same wording throughout this process so that you can know exactly where you are to look or what data you are to use in the previous step to really enhance that next step. Just a little bit more information about the program data review and about each of the 3 components. Program data review is at a school level, and it's going to look at, for each program of study or each SIP or classification for instructional program, or some call them CTE programs, you're going to look at all of the size scope quality metrics and say, yes or no, do we meet those, do we not? So it's giving you just raw data in the form of a yes or no question. And then at a school level, you're going to look at your professional learning opportunities for not just traditionally what we think of as our CTE teachers. We want to ensure that you, as school counselors or career and academic advisors, that you have an opportunity for professional learning opportunities, that also those individuals that support the students, student support personnel, it could be individuals in special education, it could be for our English learners, individuals that support them, and you can go through all the special populations and say, who supports these students for success? And we really want to know our capacity there. We want to know our capacity for professional learning for our administration, who makes our decisions at our schools and career centers. So it really takes a look at learning opportunities for all and what is our capacity to do the work that we need to do. The other third component that it talks about is related to you as well. What guidance and instruction do we do, and this could even happen at the middle school level, but what do we do to help students know about the career clusters or the programs that are available to them, and then what supports do they have? So that is a general overall question that's asked at the school district level. Then when we move on to the second component of the secondary CLNA process, we have that local needs assessment, which is at the district level. So if you are a small district where you only have one high school and that is, the only school that needs to complete the program data review or PDR, then once that's completed, you can move right into your LNA. But if you are a multi-high school district, we wanted that opportunity for each school to reflect and then to say at the local needs assessment level, what is going well at all of our school locations, and then maybe where are those growth opportunities or barriers that we might not see in all of our schools. And then we start seeing support structures between the different schools if one is doing very well in something and maybe others are struggling. So it gives that chance to look throughout the district. The local needs assessment, again, is completed at the district level, career center level, and EFE region center level. And in that, you're going to use those data points from the PDR, program data review. You're also going to have discussion questions that will guide your partners that are sitting at your table. So this could be your school partners. It could be those individuals that you work with out in the community, in business and industry. That is up to you to decide who all needs to be at the table, but definitely leverage the stakeholders that can provide a strong collaborative process through this. Keep in mind as you form maybe external stakeholders from your school to be brought into this process that they may have time limitations, and if we need them for the comprehensive local needs assessment, maybe we need to be cognizant that they can't give as much time maybe at the LNA level, but we're going to use them at that comprehensive level. So have those conversations with your EFE system directors, have those conversations with business and industry, and be respectful of their time too. So in that, you're going to have discussion questions, your data points, and then you're going to have prompts to answer questions throughout 7 steps. And I know that sounds overwhelming, but it's not as bad as it sounds. They are required components of what we need to collect based on the Perkins 5 law, and that will help us when we get to the comprehensive level to work with our external partners. So then when we take that data and move up to the third component, that's where we get to the EFE level. And this is, again, that intersection between secondary, post-secondary, and the stakeholders. The EFE system director will be the one who enters this into, because all of our secondary processes are available in IWAS. They are electronic. The beauty of that is that we will have data when we are required in 2 years to do the comprehensive local needs assessment again. And so we'll have that existing data to build off of. The only problem was the timing. So it's been a little rushed to get it out the door, but we are moving and moving ahead well right now as we currently speak. But at this level, that's where you really need to bring in all those required stakeholders from the law. We really need districts and career centers and region center staff to be a part of the comprehensive process too, because you can speak to your district's needs more than anyone else can. And it's fine to have the completed application, the local needs assessment, but to have someone who can verbalize that and speak that is crucial. The things that will be used, again, your PDR data points just rolled up to a regional level, student performance and course enrollment data, and any summative statements or information from the LNA or local needs assessments that come from the district level. Just a note, we've had a lot of questions about data, and what I can tell you is at the state level, there's a lot of data that is collected, but we also, at times, because of student identification, there is certain data that we have to redact or we cannot put out for student privacy reasons. And so if you don't have the data you need provided at the state level, because some of that information has to be pulled, especially when we start talking about those special populations or student subgroups, feel free, use data that you collect already. You are the individuals or someone from your school is the individual putting this into SIS or the Student Information System. So please use that local data, and you could use the state data also to supplement that process. But we don't want to discourage the use of what you are collecting at your local level as well. And that also involves enrollment numbers in addition to student performance. And then you'll see these three components. That's what's going to build your local application. So again, that wording and that building blocks to that local application 4-year plan. The steps that you'll go through are identification of stakeholders who are involved in the process. You'll look at student performance and those equity measures. You'll look at high quality and access to high quality CTE. Are these programs aligned to labor market? Do they meet those side scope quality definitions? And then how do we actually implement and improve our CTE programs? And finally, recruitment, retention, and training of all staff that make up this process. And the final slide is just some resources for you to use during this process. The last one I love is a collaborative document to show how post-secondary and secondary really aligns during this process and gives just great information about working together. And Marcy, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. Thanks again for being with us today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why the CLNA is important and who is affected by the CLNA. And so at OCCRL, we've been involved with creating the template for the community colleges. And so one of the reasons that the CLNA is so important, and again, this is reflected in Perkins 5, is this opportunity to advance equity. So we've spent a lot of time talking about what equity means, and so I just want to talk a little bit about that. So this is an opportunity to analyze disaggregated data to identify and address equity gaps in your local context. So again, looking at your data, and I'll talk a little bit about how we think about disaggregating the data, but really we're doing this to achieve the ultimate goal of equality. So equity in education provides students with the varied, additional, or differentiated supports needed to achieve equality. And so that comes from Welton and Lalonde that had written about equity, particularly in career and technical education. And so this image is just a representation of the difference between equality and equity. So we can see on the side of equality where everyone is essentially given the same thing and expected to somehow reach the same outcome. Whereas we look at the picture for equity and we can see that individuals need different things to be able to reach the same outcome. So as we look at the CLNA, again, an opportunity to identify what those equity gaps are and then prioritize how we are going to change our systems and our institutions to advance support for students that are experiencing those equity gaps. And so just as an example, there was a great learning community provided through ICSPS, I think it was last week, on looking at foster care involved youth. And so again, there was a lot of information and resources provided to help think about how our institutions and our systems can change the way that we do things to, again, create those differentiated supports that lessen the barriers for students that are involved in the foster care system to be successful in higher education. So just kind of as an example that, you know, those students do need differentiated supports to reach the same outcome as students that are not involved in that system. So again, how do we do this as we're engaging in our local context to close those equity gaps? So when we think about disaggregated data, and moving to the next slide in terms of why the CLNA is important, we want to look at, of course, Perkins special populations, but also, and as we look at the actual template for post-secondary, students from racially minoritized groups. And so those were two ways that we really prioritize in terms of how institutions disaggregate their data to identify equity gaps. So it's that comprehensive look at your CTE programs, again, engaging all your stakeholder groups toward equity-minded continuous improvement. So again, you're looking at the data to really have evidence to be able to say, we can see which student subpopulations are experiencing equity gaps. And those might be opportunity gaps. How are students finding out about CTE? Who's participating and who's not? And even going and looking at, you know, high wage, high demand occupations. Do we see stratification of access in terms of which students are entering these high wage, high demand and which students aren't? So even within CTE, looking and asking those questions and using your data to identify where those gaps exist and then getting to the root cause of what that is. And again, how do you prioritize resources and support to close those gaps? And so when we think about, again, why this is important in the context of Illinois in particular, this is just some research that, again, we have presented as we've talked about this process and why it's important, that gender and racial disparities in CTE participation at the secondary level in Illinois primarily affect women and Black and Latinx students. So again, looking at our statewide information and where those equity gaps exist. The impact of state disinvestment in higher education that has been especially impacting Black, Latinx, and rural students. And I would encourage you, the Partnership for College Completion has issued 3 separate reports on those subpopulations. And again, looking at how over time those populations have been impacted, specifically in the state of Illinois, and also offering suggestions that, again, as we look at this in our local context, what can we do to advance support and close equity gaps? And then also Illinois having the highest unemployment rate for Black workers nationwide. So again, prioritizing how we disaggregate our data and also prioritizing support to close these gaps. And then in terms of, again, looking at advancing race consciousness, and so again, how we're disaggregating our data, that this report came out recently from the Education Trust, and there's a really brief summary video that I would even encourage people to watch, but essentially looking at why it's problematic when we see institutions looking at income and not wanting to be race conscious. And so the differences in opportunity and outcomes for students from families of similar incomes but different races are the result of inequities within education and the broader society. And so again, this reinforces the importance of your stakeholders. And so again, you know your students and the importance of you being involved in terms of understanding what barriers exist. But then again, looking at this as a broader system of how do we engage and prioritize at the local level with our secondary community, our post-secondary community, with our employers and industry and workforce to, again, come together to advance equity in our local context and facilitate these conversations. And then finally, who is affected by the CLNA? Of course, we've talked about your internal stakeholders, and again, the importance for all of you that are very student-facing, and again, are understanding these barriers that exist and how we might go about addressing them for special populations and other student subpopulations. Our external stakeholders, so again, if we want to advance employment and we want to close or address income inequality, how do we engage our external stakeholders in that process? And then ultimately, these findings will guide your local application. So again, the focus on equity being that you're looking at your evidence, you're looking at your data in your local context to set priorities for how you are going to advance equity in CTE. And then ultimately, of course, what you're doing is advancing opportunities, access, outcomes for students in your local context. And at this time, I will turn it over to Tasha. So thank you.
Thanks, Marcy. I think before I dive into the slides about post-secondary and the CLNA and their role, Whitney Manhaffey is going to do an overview of the secondary CTE counselors and their role in the local needs assessment.
Thanks, Tasha. And I think you will see a strong intersection between secondary and post-secondary, even in the slides that I am sharing, where at the secondary level, your role as a school counselor, a career and academic counselor, career academic guidance staff, whatever your role or title may be, you are very much an integral part of understanding the school's programs of study, and that goes beyond just the CTE courses that are offered to students. That goes into the academic requirements and all of the other pieces that make a quality CTE program. You are the one many times working with administration, working with teachers to decide how courses are offered. You have such a crucial role in open communication with students. It was remiss to leave off parents here, but students, parents, CTE teachers, specialized support personnel, administration, you really communicate with everyone in your school or district. And again, to highlight that key importance, that in that role, your ability to receive those professional learning opportunities to help you understand the CTE and career side of your three-domain role. We know that you aren't just doing career, the career domain aspect. You're doing social emotional learning with students. You're doing the academic side of it. So you really have such a broad focus, but helping you understand your role in career and CTE even better is so crucial. You possibly maybe the person in your school, potentially outside of administration, that really engages with community, post-secondary partners, industry partners the most, or if not, you'll start seeing that role as we walk through the CLNA process. And you are part of the staff that helps the students find their voice, but also when they can't be at every meeting, you are their voice. And I think that's such an important point to bring forward, and that's why your role is so significant in the LNA process. And if you've not been pulled into those conversations, asking those questions of your administration about being able to support that process in whatever way possible, because your role is so crucial and so central to all of this being successful. And then at the comprehensive level, you are a necessary voice too. Now, will all school counselors be able to be a part of the entire comprehensive local needs assessment process? Potentially not, because we know you have time restrictions. But in some way, your information, your voice, your input being heard is really going to be important. And I like this graphic for the simple fact that it takes what I said in the previous slide and it shows that you really are that intersection point between all of those parties. And again, when I talk about students, that does include their parents as well, because at this stage in the game, they are still very much engaged in that process with their student or child. And then the final slide from the secondary perspective is really you are that person that is helping to ensure access for all by being that communication person or point of contact within the secondary stakeholders. You're going to be very involved in the recruitment and retention plan building to address equity gaps. You're very important to CTE enrollment being what it is and making sure the right students are receiving the right opportunities in their scheduling and course planning. And then beyond, you're the one who takes the student from where they're at in the secondary realm and helps them launch themselves into whatever is after secondary, whether that be a career, post-secondary education, apprenticeship. There's just so many options for them, and you are that person, and that's where that PACE framework comes into play too, is really helping those students plan for the future. And Tasha, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Whitney, and thank you so much, Marcy. And as Whitney said, a lot of these points are points of intersection. I think that's something that's so fantastic about the CLNA and all of these opportunities for partnership. But I think first and foremost, the U.S. Department of Education has identified counselors and advisors as required partners. And don't look at it as extra workload. Look at it as really an opportunity, a unique opportunity to invoke change. I know at some point, all of us have sat at our desk and said, I wish it was this way. I wish we could do this, and this. Really take this as the opportunity to invoke that change. Oftentimes, especially in post-secondary, advisors are the frontline staff. They are the gateway. Be that gateway. Do not be a gatekeeper. Marcy talked a lot about equity and addressing those identified equity gaps. If there are those equity gaps and those equity gaps are identified when you're doing the CLNA, what are you doing personally to combat those and to fix those equity gaps? Ensuring that you aren't perpetuating any kind of unintentional bias or stereotype on the students that you're serving. And those topics are conversations for another day, and the OCCRL and the ICSPS have a lot of great resources about unintentional bias and stereotype threat. But again, I just want to reiterate what I said earlier about there's oftentimes that disconnect between secondary and post-secondary systems in general. So again, I think the CLNA is such a unique and great opportunity to do that deep dive into, all right, what do we need at our institutional level? And then how can we marry that with our partners across the way, across the hall, are your secondary partners? And then also marrying that with your workforce needs, the local business and industry needs, needs of the special population serving institutions in your community, community-based organizations. So I think it's a really unique opportunity that we all have to do this partnership together. And just something super basic, just be present, not even necessarily only physically, but mentally be present, bring your ideas, bring your thoughts. Like I said earlier, at some point, we've all wanted something to be a different way, so this is your opportunity. So moving forward, our next webinar is on February 13th, and that is about building your CTE network. And the intrinsic nature of collaboration of the Comprehensive Local Needs Assessment is really a perfect opportunity to determine who is in your CTE network. So just be thinking about those types of things, maybe make a few notes about who you think is in your CTE network, and that's what we're going to be discussing on our next webinar. And I'm going to, at this point, hand it over to Amy. She's going to give a little bit more information about that, and then the rest of our upcoming professional development within the CTE Counselor Academy. I just want to again thank Whitney Mahaffey and Dr. Marcy Rocky for their bringing their expertise to this webinar.
Thank you, Tasha, and thank you, Marcy, and thank you, Whitney. This has been fantastic. Just a couple things I want to go over, and then again, if you have notes, if you have questions, if you have comments, please post those in the question pane. We haven't had a lot of questions during this webinar, but if you do have questions, go ahead and post those. If you have questions afterwards, you'll be getting an email and a survey and a recording of this webinar, so feel free to reply to that, and I can get the questions directed to the proper individual on the call. So as Tasha said, we do have who is in your CTE network, really outlining what that network should look like and who does exist within your CTE network, and what are the resources the state provides to assist you as counselors within navigating career and technical education. That's February 13th at 10 a.m. Examples of effective CTE network is February 27th at 10 a.m. And this is where we really showcase some local effective practices. So we talk about what needs to be done, and then we talk about who's doing it well, and then we'll showcase those ideas of who's doing it well. The capstone event is March 6th. We will have that in Springfield at the Crown Plaza. Registration is open, and I will send that out with this email as well. If you haven't seen that already, and I'm guessing you have since you're on this webinar today, but we are going to, the exciting part of that day is really kind of bringing all this back together, focusing, as I said, in many of the correspondence that I've had with you. This year we're focusing on Perkins 5 and what the local needs assessment means, what Perkins 5 means for counselors. And so we're going to have a business panel come in and talk about effective ways to communicate with business as counselors, and what does that business engagement mean that is outlined in the law. So some very exciting stuff coming on March 6th. Again, I'm going to check for questions real quick. If there's anybody who would like to speak, please raise your hand. And if not, I do have a question. So our first question here is, can you say a little bit more about what will happen at the capstone event and who will be presenting? Yes, absolutely. So we have, we're putting together a panel. The individuals who have currently spoke on these webinars will also be there presenting. So it will be the state. Natasha will be speaking for the Community College Board. Whitney and Heather will be representing the State Board of Education. We are also partnering with Leah Brock from the ILCTE Illinois Curricular Revitalization Project. And so those individuals will all be speaking. As for business panel specifically, we're still finalizing that agenda, but once that's prepared, we'll be sending that out before, probably in mid-February. Any other questions? Question for the state, what is the timeline for the CLNA? Is there a specific due date when we can expect the needs assessment to be completed?
For the post-secondary side, there is no hard deadline. I know that's what everyone loves to hear. However, the findings from your CLNA must inform your local application. So before you can even start your local application, the CLNA needs to be done. So that's going to look different for every local and regional area. Some are bigger than others. Everyone kind of has their own process for how they're doing the CLNA in terms of outreach to different stakeholders and different partners. So I'm not trying to give anyone a wishy-washy answer, but that's what it is. Again, just make sure that you have your CLNA complete before you do your local application. So that's going to kind of determine the timelines in that respect. What about you, Whitney, for secondary?
The State Board of Education would ditto that response. Essentially, we have set out some landmark timelines for when it might be ideal to complete these processes, because Tentatively, we have a May 1st opening of our state and federal. It will actually be a consolidated application this year. So 1 4-year local application or 4-year plan with 2 budget streams to address those needs. And again, just like what Tasha said, you cannot do the local application without having completed the comprehensive local needs assessment, because by law it does have to inform that 4-year plan.
Thank you so much, Whitney. And that reminds me, for post-secondary, your local application is due on May 1st. I know there's some misalignment of timelines between secondary and post-secondary, and those are conversations we've been having for the future. But just to keep that in mind, for post-secondary, the local application is due on May 1st. So that, keeping that in mind, that can inform some of those internal timelines that you have for completing the comprehensive local needs assessment.
And you're exactly right, Tasha. I think in the future we would like to align those dates more closely. This year we're running into some things with the first year doing a consolidated application, but I think we're headed in a good direction to get back to a more streamlined timeline between the 2 entities.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Thank you both for those detailed answers. Micah Ramirez, you have your hand up. I will unmute you if you have a question. You are now unmuted.
No. I'm sorry, no, my question was answered.
Oh, thank you very much.
Sure.
Any other questions for our speakers today? There was, oh, I missed, there is a question about indicating that this activity, the capstone event, is taking place the same week as the Central Connections Conference. And yes, that will be the Friday of this Connections Conference. Whitney or Tasha, do you want to speak to that?
So initially, when all this was, when the CTE Counselor Academy was, when we were getting all the stuff together, the capstone event was slated to be a pre-conference to the Connections Conference, which has typically been up in Chicago, and it's been a 2-day thing, just one sort of conference. But this year, they're taking a regional approach. So there's one event in Chicago, one more central in Springfield, I think, yeah, Springfield. And then there's one at a more southern location in Carbondale. So instead of doing 3 different regional capstone events, there is just one capstone event on March 6th, which is the day after the second day of the Springfield Career Connections Conference. Whitney, if that's a little too convoluted, please feel free to fix that.
No, I think you covered it well. And I think, again, we've had a lot of timelines this year that have changed, and we're basically working within the best realm of our capacity right now. But I think as we outline this state plan moving forward, we're going to be in a great position to see a lot of forward thinking in our planning of these professional learning opportunities to really align those pieces.
Yes, thank you so much. Absolutely.
Excellent, thank you. We have one other question. What are the most essential variables relevant to CTE post-secondary as the variables related to analyzing disaggregated data?
I think that is a question maybe for offline. When you're thinking about disaggregated data, it's just really important to keep in mind I can't really think of the word, just making sure that your data is clean. So in terms of post-secondary, looking at the data that you provide to us through your A1 report, we're hoping to have the CTE data dashboard out very soon. So that'll be a really good resource You can also look at your PODS data. I'm not sure specifically who's asking this question, if you know what PODS is and know how to access that, but that's the post-secondary online data system. So that's where you're going to be pulling all of your data from when you're looking at that disaggregated data to utilize for your CLNA. But if you want to contact me, we can have a more in-depth conversation about that offline.
Excellent. Thank you, Tasha. There have been a couple questions about where do we find information on the Connections Conference. That is available on the Illinois State Board of Education website, but in addition to that, I will send it out with this, kind of keeping a list of what all is coming to you in this email. I can send you a link to the Connections Conference information because it has taken a new breath of fresh air, and I'm excited to see what it does look like this year. And then final question I think is for Whitney, would be should each EFE region have a team at the capstone event?
That really is going to be up to availability to do so. Ideally, it would be wonderful to see a team from each EFE system, and honestly, to be able to reach all of our school counselors in the state of Illinois. But we know there are many restrictions. So I think if an EFE system can ensure that they have representation and then that information can be shared back in case you do have school counselors or personnel that cannot make it that day, I think that would be wonderful.
Thank you. Okay, I believe, just double checking that I got all the questions that have come in. And I believe we are right close to time. You get about 4 minutes left in your day. So thank you all for attending. Again, this recording will be coming out in an email as well as a evaluation for both the first and second webinar, and I will send you links to both the recording for this webinar and the previous webinar in case anybody had missed those. The next webinar, again, will be February 13th, so right before Valentine's Day, and we hope you can join us for that. Thank you to our presenters, Marcy, Natasha, and Whitney, for sharing your expertise about the Comprehensive Local Needs Assessment, and thank you to everyone who took time out of their day to attend. Again, have a wonderful day, and everyone keep warm. Thank you.